My name's Tom Idle. I'm a writer, a journalist, specialised in sustainable business. And I've been here for the last couple of days running a series of short and sharp sessions on a range of subjects, which has been really, really interesting. And this next one is also of interest. Regenerative agriculture probably deserves a bigger platform at an event like this, I would say. But here we are. And it promises a transformational shift in how we produce food, while restoring ecosystems, sequestering carbon, improving soil health. But as more businesses adopt the term, we have to ask, is it truly the future of farming, or is it another buzzword that we're used to in corporate sustainability? So that's what we're going to dig into in the next session. I'm going to get our panel to introduce themselves shortly, but we do have Slido running on Edie Extra. So if you've got questions for our panelists as you listen in, then please do send them across. Just search for the Edie Extra stage and submit your questions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can in the time we have, which is not a lot of time. So do that. So I want to welcome our panel. We have Hannah Cornick from Danone, and we have Duncan Williams from Forum for the Future. Before we kick off on our conversation, do you want to just briefly introduce yourselves and what it is you do at your respective organisations? Hannah, do you want to go first?
Yep. So I'm Hannah Cornick, Head of Sustainability at Danone. So we're a health-focused food and drink company. We have brands ranging from our Alpro plant-based brands, dairy-based brands like Activia, Actimel, baby formula, and water brands, as well as some really specialised medical nutrition products. So quite a wide variety. But I think, agriculture is really kind of underpinning all of them. We're reliant on nature for our ingredients. So it's really important that we find solutions that actually enable us to kind of continue to produce our products in a sustainable way. So we've been working on regenerative agriculture approaches since around 2016. We've developed our own sort of framework based around 3 pillars of nature, animal welfare, and farmer livelihoods. And we feel like it's really important to have that holistic approach, and that, if you're only focusing on one area, actually you're not going to really crack the issue. And also kind of focus really very much on working collaboratively. So, we have projects in over 14 countries. They're usually multi-stakeholder projects bringing together, local experts, different businesses. And we also do try and share any learning. So we have a regenerative agriculture knowledge centre where we publish lots of information, because we really believe that we do need to scale regenerative agriculture, and it's the only way of delivering a resilient farming system for the future.
Great. Excellent. Duncan?
Yeah, certainly. So Duncan Williams, I lead the UK food team at Forum for the Future. For those of you who don't know, Forum is a international charity based across the US, Europe, India, and Southeast Asia. Our kind of main job is to prod and poke and to ask difficult questions and be those sort of guys in the room. But we fundamentally believe that we're not going fast enough. The transformations that we see are not going deep enough. So we try to partner with leading organizations across the world to try and accelerate the transformation to a more just and regenerative future.
Great. Regenerative agriculture, there's no universal definition for it. So how do you define it?
Yeah, so as I said, we have developed our own framework. We worked actually originally with WWF in France to develop that, and have really, sort of embedded a model that, tries to look holistically across the various impacts. So, when we talk about nature, that's everything from climate to soil to water, biodiversity, animal health and welfare, we believe is really fundamental. And that, also none of this will work unless we're really thinking about farmers themselves and making sure that they see a future in this industry. But I think we really recognize that actually, unless we have a common framework, common definition, that we're not going to be able to scale regenerative agriculture in the way that we want. So that's why in recent years, we've been working with the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative on the development of a kind of common industry framework called Regenerating Together. So there's been guidance on that released over the last couple of years. I do think that now provides a really robust framework that everyone can be working with. It's very much outcomes based, sets out really clear metrics to actually measure the impact of regenerative agriculture, but it's also flexible enough to adapt to different farming systems and different contexts. It really helps you think about what are the most material issues for my particular farming system. So that's something we're now adopting in our business and embedding those kind of metrics and that framework in the way we measure our impact. And I think very much encouraging others to get on board, because I think unless we have that common definition, that we know that there's a danger, as you said at the beginning, that this just sounds like a buzzword, that it doesn't have that level of credibility. So I think really important if we want to scale it.
100% agree. Like, I think that common definition will be useful. The caveat I'll make is that what do we do then? Because I actually bought
Show and tell.
I got a show and tell. So this is, and it's not to sort of slag off the organic movement. I'm a massive supporter of what they do. Like, we've had environmental sustainability movements such as organic around for ages. They are defined. This one even like donates to charity as part of that product, right? So just getting a definition is not going to be enough, right? We need to then say, what are we going to do with it? So I see two directions that this goes in. Low ambition. Let's get on organic light certification going in there, so we can start selling products on the shelf that have got a label on it, regen picking, pick up the regen milk from the shelf. Organics at 4%. If we think we are going to accelerate this transformation quickly enough by doing small consumerist changes, education-based policies, let's learn from organic and let's actually discard that as the only way we can drive change. What we see, and this is where it's really interesting, with businesses that come with ambition and say, we're going to see 30% regen sourcing, we're going to see 50% regen sourcing. That's about a fundamental change across the entire of agriculture. And that's what we need to see. We need to see it's not just regen as a product on the shelf. I'd love this regen loaf. It's actually saying we're embedding outcome-based frameworks across the entire of agriculture. That's going to transform the outcomes that we need to see on climate, on biodiversity, and on farmer livelihoods.
Yeah. Some critics might argue that this is just a repackaging exercise of farming, practices that have gone before. What is truly transformational about regenerative agriculture?
I mean, in a way, I would agree with some of that. I actually don't think we should be, ashamed of that or try and hide it in any way. There are definitely a lot of aspects of regenerative agriculture which is about going back to traditional practices. So things like crop rotations, no tillage of the soil to maintain soil structure, there's wisdom in that, that's been passed down through many generations. So let's harness that. But I also think what's great is that, is bringing that together with the latest science. So, I think we've really moved forward, for example, on how you manage and measure soil carbon sequestration. And that, really then is enabling you to actually demonstrate the benefits and the outcomes from some of those practices. So I think actually, let's embrace the best of both. Let's embrace those traditional farming techniques and go back to them, but let's also be guided by the latest science.
Yeah. And what about measuring impact? We've got a question here. What metrics are best for measuring the impact of regen ag projects?
Do you want to kick off?
Well, this is the real opportunity here, that actually when you look at people like SciPlatform, they are creating outcome-based models. And I think when you incorporate that with new technologies like remote sensing, then we've got an opportunity to actually say, let's look at soil organic carbon. Let's look at biodiversity. It's tricky to do that remotely. You can do habitat monitoring. You can't necessarily do species numbers. Water quality is a massive one. It'd be interesting to hear where you're at on that, because that's something that's it's really messy to measure, right? Certain amounts of that we can do a prediction. So we've got the ability to look at soil cover. We know rainfall, we know slope. We can actually probably predict soil runoff as a proxy of what we're doing to the soil. But one thing that we've got within regen is to say, well, can we decrease fertilizer usage? That should then decrease our water eutrophication impact. So there is a bit of an element that kind of no matter what we're going to start measuring here, we need to build better connections within the supply chain, because you're not going to be able to get any of that data unless you know where your product's coming from, and then you can attach to it water, climate, biodiversity impacts.
And presumably that's the biggest barrier to adoption of regen ag. It's that engagement along the supply chain. What's your approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're really lucky. We work with around 64,000 farmers globally, and a lot of those we actually have a direct relationship with, particularly with our dairy farmers. And, the farming systems really vary. We work with many smallholder farmers, for example, in Africa, and then, much, much larger farms in places like Europe or North America. So I do think having that direct relationship does really help. Equally, I think there are examples where we've been able to work through kind of cooperatives or intermediaries. So, for example, we have a project in Morocco where we've been supporting smallholder farmers to actually, just improve some of the sort of basic productivity. So working on things like animal health and welfare, better conditions for their cows, installing new technologies like milking, because, once you can improve productivity, you can reduce the carbon intensity of the milk. And actually there it's been really critical to work through the what they call collection centres. So these are the places that the smallholder farmers would go to take their milk to have that then sold on. Yeah. And actually those people are often, trusted local experts. They really understand that local context, and obviously they enable you to reach a much wider group of people. So I think, actually, yes, direct relationships are really important, but it's about finding those kind of intermediaries, trusted partners, wherever you're operating locally, that can really help you connect.
And that's super important because it's context, right? One of the core components of regenerative agriculture is applying it to the context you're in. Like the smallholder context and the UK context are going to be completely different. In the UK, we see yes, there's knowledge exchange barriers there, but actually we're creating different knowledge structures there. So that's kind of been eroded. But one of the fundamental problems that we've got in scaling regen in the UK is that it's more expensive to be a good farmer right now. So those farmers that are really leading the way are taking on additional costs because they don't want to pollute the rivers and they don't want to dig up all their soil carbon. So we're kind of in this perverse system where the farmers that probably supply chains want the most are the most financially burdened. So kind of, we're trying to use our influence to reverse that and get those externalities incorporated back into the system. Enforcement of existing regulations is like a really easy win there, but we're not putting any money towards that, unfortunately. But then actually just holding on tight to those farmers that are doing really good things, using them as pilot farms, but then understanding how can we then spread the message that are coming out from those leading organizations to the wider community as well.
So of your 64,000 farmers, how many are currently practicing a regen ag?
So the way that we've looked at and the way we set our metric is based on the percentage of our key ingredients which are coming from regenerative agriculture. And we set our target as 30% by 2025, but actually as of last year, we were already at 39%. So, we now need to reset that bar. So for us, I think it is really important that we recognize the journey. So, definitely need those outcome-based measures, but we know it's going to take time to get there. That, some of the practices that you're going to be implementing are going to take 2, 3, maybe even more years before you really see that impact, for example, on soil health, and you can really measure that carbon sequestration. So we need to put in place the measurement now, but we also need to have a way of measuring the kind of milestones on that journey and incentivizing farmers to start. So, again, another thing I really like about the Regenerating Together framework is that it does actually look at those different stages, and recognizes that you've started on the regenerative agriculture journey, along that roadmap to get to those outcomes. And I think if we want farmers and businesses to come on board, we need to do that. There needs to be a short-term payback or a short-term benefit, as well as the longer-term resilience, which ultimately it's going to deliver.
So is that what Danone's doing then? You're paying a premium to get these guys started early on? Yeah,
I mean, we have a whole range of different models that are adapted to what's needed in the local area, and there would definitely, think financial security and incentives play a key role, as well as kind of knowledge sharing and upskilling. There are countries where we kind of pay a premium, for example, for implementing different carbon reduction practices. We've also enabled our farmers to unlock other sources of finance. So we have a project in France called Les Deux Pieds sur Terre, where we work with over 1,000 dairy farmers, and we gave them access all to on-farm advisors to help them build their own tailored plans locally of what was going to be most relevant for them. And again, they're operating in a very different context from the smallholders in Morocco that I talked about earlier. So in that case, it was, not those kind of basic productivity aspects. It was more things like my cows are experiencing heat stress. I need to plant trees or hedgerows on my farm to give them shade, but also at the same time to bring more biodiversity into my land. And once we'd kind of built those plans with them, we then worked with a really innovative local crowdsourcing platform that then enabled them to access different sources of finance to actually implement those projects. So I think, our finding has been that it needs a mixture of both. I think we also really need to look at market-based mechanisms as well that reward farmers. I think there's quite a lot of really interesting schemes developing. I'm really encouraged to see lots of also, financial institutions getting involved in those to actually say, how do you pay and reward farmers for nature-based outcomes?
Right.
And I think that's really where the future lies, actually.
Yeah. And will we get, I'm thinking about investors, but also consumers. Will we get to a stage where consumers are interested in this stuff in the same way they might seek out an organic bottle of milk? Will we get consumers seeking out regen ag products?
I think so. And it's going to be part of that transition. You can already go to various places and buy regen products. So it exists and it will help fund that transition. It's not going to be the end point.
Yeah.
I think that's my point with that one. And I think it's super important. The more engaged we can get, but we can't rely on people walking into a supermarket and making a decision to spend more on a product, because fundamentally that's saying that actually we're putting the burden onto that person where they've got different competing interests, or it might just be that they're unaware of it. So I think to put all of the burden on the consumer, it takes back the responsibility that actually is sat within the supply chain to not have if we're calling one regenerative, the degenerative supply chain alongside it, and say, well, we're still going to keep this because no one's bought the regen product at the end of it.
And it is super complex. We definitely want to crack this because we really think that it will help to build the business case for regenerative agriculture alongside, the obvious benefits of resilience. But we've been doing a lot of really in-depth consumer research to really understand what do they think regenerative agriculture means? How do we communicate it in the most effective way? Firstly, it's shown that most people really don't see the link between farming and environmental degradation. They're just very disconnected from how their food is produced. They, associate other industries, maybe like the energy sector, for example, with climate change or with environmental issues, not farming. So there's an education piece there to start off with. And then I think it's really shown us that we have to find the right language and the right angles to engage them with. It needs to be something that feels relevant and has direct benefits for them. So, aspects like, improvement in quality or, health benefits, or, it's better for my local community and my local farming industry are much more likely to resonate than concepts like carbon reduction or soil health, which just feel too technical, too remote, and just people don't engage with.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to some of the questions we're getting from our audience. Somebody says regen needs to come from the farmers, yet we're seeing financial support for sustainable farming drop. What's in it for them, given we need the wholesale shift? We've covered a lot of this already, but
yeah, I think there's a fundamental question here about what this transition looks like, and what does a just transition look like for farmers, because there is, across a lot of things, we're talking about either shifting business models or reducing meat and dairy consumption, whichever the one those are. We can do that the good way and we can do that the bad way. And I think if we look at what the good way looks like, it's maintaining farmer livelihoods, it's maintaining the history and the culture associated with agricultural production. And it's not just leaving things up to the market, because what we see when we got the market alone doing these decisions is big intensification and then kicking farmers off land and planting trees.
Yeah.
And, that might get us to the same end point, but because it's a fundamentally low quality transition, we've lost so much more at the same time as we've hit a certain carbon reduction or a certain percentage change.
Yeah.
And I think, we need to be really honest as well that, different practices are going to have different payback periods as well for farmers. Yes, there are some changes that farmers can make that they're going to be able to see, quite short-term benefits from. If you improve animal health and welfare, for example, you are likely to see in quite a short time frame benefits from a productivity perspective. But some of the practices that might be more about kind of enhancing soil health, that's probably going to take years. So I do think that's where, we need private sector finance, but we also need public sector funding as well to be providing those right financial incentives to farmers and helping them with that transition.
Yeah. Another interesting framing device with regen ag is nutritional value. And somebody asked the question, is there scientific evidence about the nutritional value coming from regen ag versus traditional agricultural practices? What's the evidence?
I mean, I don't think there is yet, but I think it's the holy grail that lots of us are trying to crack and that we'd love to get to because, as I was saying earlier on, I think that is the thing that would really cut through with consumers. And I think, maybe there's almost an instinctive, perhaps, assumption from some consumers that it would do. I think people get that, if you take care of your ingredients, that you produce them in the right way, that should lead to benefits. But we're definitely not there yet in terms of being able to make those claims.
Is that something you Forum are working on, Duncan, or not?
It's not. We work with a lot of people who are. I think there's a logic to it. You're exactly right. Like healthy plants make healthy animals, like make healthy people. Like you can see that it's a great story. And actually, when we're talking about consumer decisions, like much more like consumer-based decisions are made on health rather than environmental outcomes.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, you're never going to be the difference between categories. So conventional milk to organic and regenerative milk is never gonna, you're never gonna have the same level of difference as milk to a steak or milk to a pea. Like those are fundamentally category differences that are gonna have a much bigger nutritional impact. But
yeah, sure. Another question we have here: how do you select the crops for your regen ag farms? Since monoculture isn't an option, you may not need all the crops grown for your supply chain.
I think that's where it's really important to work collaboratively. Actually, we were just talking before about, for example, the arable sector, where often people are, farming a particular crop in a rotation. So as you say, they'd have multiple different crops. And I think there are lots of projects developing. The LEND program is a really interesting example in the UK, which is a landscape-based approach where actually they're bringing together multiple stakeholders. So, or they use the term multiple off-takers. So different types of businesses who might be buying different types of crops within the rotation, as well as actually a much broader set of stakeholders. So, for example, water companies, and developing a model where actually based on the kind of purchase volumes of each of those stakeholders that they kind of invest and claim benefits from that program. So I think that's where it does really need a collaborative approach.
But like the framing of that question, sorry to have read it, like you're never going to choose the crop for the farming, right? If we've got this top-down mentality, this is never going to succeed. So like we've got to work with farmers. And I think when we see collaborations happening, someone at the top trying to impose something on a farmer, fundamentally that there's disquiet, and it's very much a like a payment base. Like you pay me this much, I'm going to give you this much. And that transactional nature doesn't actually allow for the deeper transformations that we're doing. So what we're trying to do is build partnerships around that supply chain where actually some people in that collaboration have to let go of it. And we actually have to open up to different voices in the room and say, what does everyone transforming together look like? Because if it's top down, it's not going to work.
How are we going to scale this up then? How do we get more Danones on board? How do we go big on regen ag?
I mean, I actually think I'm really encouraged to see that we do have a lot of other businesses, now really embracing this. I think most the big food and drink players are recognizing that actually this is really fundamental to their future resilience. And initiatives like the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative are bringing those organizations together. I think actually having more of that collaboration between the public and the private sector on this would really help. We've seen in other geographies like North America, pre the latest administration, and in Belgium, where actually like having that combination of public private sector financing is helping to unlock some of those longer term transformations or bigger scaling up of pilot projects. So I feel quite hopeful that actually we are kind of on that journey. I don't know, are you optimistic?
I always try and stay optimistic as much as I can. Side Platform is an amazing initiative bringing all those players together. I think to add to it would be some form of unified voice to say, actually, government, can we push in this direction? Because I think until we see the research environment aligned behind this, the regulation environment aligned behind this, and just really, like their incentive programs aligned behind it, things like that, until we can really start pushing in a single direction, then I think we're always going to have these conflicts. Because I think at some points we do have some conflicts that we don't like to talk about, but there are some fundamental business models that are tensions here, some sectors are tensions here that are maybe not having the same focus. Like we obviously both work in the dairy industry a lot. Like that's been a big focus of a lot of the climate-based changes, but some of the other livestock sectors have got away a little bit free, whereas actually they're not very regenerative by nature right now. So I think if we can try and take those platforms and start pushing the same direction, it'll be really useful.
Indeed. Well, look, in the interest of time, we have to wrap up, but thank you for your great questions, and thank you for Duncan and Hannah for their time. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And